Damien Rivers had always lived by the creed that solitude was his greatest ally. From a very young age, he had been convinced that there was no need for the messy entanglements of family or sentimentality. Every decision, every calculated step, had been taken with an unyielding determination to build an empire that would stand the test of time. In his meticulously crafted existence, success was the only currency that mattered, and nothing, no lingering past or faint memory, could shake that certainty. On one seemingly ordinary day, as he strode through the sterile corridors of St. Marcellus Memorial, a hospital renamed to evoke a sense of quiet dignity, his orderly world was upended by the unexpected appearance of a little girl. With eyes the shade of the summer sky and a voice imbued with desperate urgency, she reached out and tugged at his tailored sleeve. "Please, help my mom," she whispered, her tone laden with both hope and an inexplicable familiarity that stirred something deep within him. Damien paused, his mind racing with the implications of that simple request. He could have easily dismissed her, returning to the schedule he had so carefully constructed. Instead, he lingered, caught in a moment of bewildering vulnerability, as the girl mentioned a name that shattered the fortress of his solitude: Lena Brooks. The mere utterance of that name was like a shard of broken glass, slicing through the polished veneer of his carefully controlled life. For years, Damien had perfected the art of calculated detachment. As the chief executive of a flourishing hospitality conglomerate that stretched across the nation, he had embraced discipline, precision, and a relentless focus on the future. Emotions, distractions, and the unpredictable nature of human relationships were variables he had long excised from his equation. Yet now, in that quiet hospital corridor, a cascade of memories surged forth, unbidden and overwhelming. Earlier that afternoon, he had arrived at the hospital not out of a sentimental duty, but because one of his top managers had been involved in a car accident. Although the injuries were minor and far from life-threatening, Damien's sense of responsibility compelled him to check on the situation. Loyalty to his staff was non-negotiable, even if his manner was more businesslike than warm. He had spent mere minutes in sterile conversation with the attending physician before preparing to leave, already calculating the lost minutes from his precious schedule. Then, amid the clinical hum of fluorescent lights and echoing footsteps, that small voice pierced his concentration again. "Please, help my mom." Damien halted in his tracks, his mind momentarily adrift as he turned to face the source of the plea. Before him stood a little girl whose wide blue eyes shimmered with a blend of desperation and determination. Her slight frame was encased in a worn jacket, her tiny hands clutched around the fabric as if it were a lifeline. Her pallid face and trembling expression were disarming, and, for a heartbeat, he hesitated, wondering if perhaps she had mistaken him for another guardian in this labyrinth of care. She did not search around for anyone else, nor did she exhibit the confused demeanor of a child lost in a bustling hospital. Instead, her gaze fixed intently on him, as if she recognized him from another life, a life he had tried desperately to forget. "Who is your mother?" he inquired, his tone measured and devoid of the softness that might betray the stirring of old emotions. With a swallow that betrayed her fear, the girl's voice wavered as she replied, "My mom's name is Lena Brooks." In that moment, time itself seemed to suspend, and Damien's breath caught in his throat. It had been over a decade since he had heard that name, a name that had once been synonymous with tenderness and promise. The revelation sent a shockwave through him, shaking the very foundations of the carefully curated empire he had built. For an instant, the relentless march of time receded into the background, replaced by an overwhelming tide of memories. He recalled a past filled with shared dreams and unspoken hopes, a past where love had once thrived amidst the chaos of ambition. The sight of that little girl, with her haunting blue eyes and a determination that belied her years, stirred a deep-seated conflict within him. Was it possible that fate had conspired to draw him back to a past he had long sealed away? Unable to ignore the pull of destiny any longer, Damien found himself reluctantly following the child down a long, pristine hallway. Each measured step took him further from the sterile efficiency of his business world and closer to a realm where emotions reigned supreme, a realm he had thought was forever out of reach. The corridors of St. Marcellus Memorial, with their immaculate white walls and echoing silence, now bore witness to an internal struggle that threatened to upend everything he had ever known. As they advanced, the little girl led him with an urgency that seemed both instinctual and poignant. Her delicate fingers clung to his sleeve as if they were tethering him to a lifeline in a sea of uncertainty. There was an unmistakable familiarity in her bearing, a resemblance that sparked a fleeting recollection of moments long past. The way her eyes darted about, her slight frown of concentration, and the resolute set of her jaw all hinted at a story that was both complex and heart-wrenching. They arrived at a quiet room at the end of the hall, its door slightly ajar as if inviting him into a world he had once left behind. The girl paused, her small hand lingering on the cool metal of the door handle, before she finally spoke in a hushed tone. "She doesn't like to ask for help," she murmured, her voice trembling with an earnest vulnerability that belied her age. Damien's heart pounded in a rhythm he had long forgotten, a rhythm that resonated with both dread and hope. With a curt nod, he allowed the girl to open the door, stepping into a room where time itself seemed to slow to a contemplative crawl. There, lying in a hospital bed, was a woman whose presence stirred a maelstrom of memories within him. Lena Brooks, though visibly weakened by the ravages of time and illness, exuded a quiet strength that was both mesmerizing and heartbreaking. Her dark hair, loosely tied back, framed a face that bore the traces of years filled with both joy and sorrow. The once vibrant color of her eyes had dimmed slightly, yet they still shone with an inner light that spoke of resilience and enduring spirit. Even in this frail state, there was an undeniable familiarity that struck Damien to the core. He found himself standing transfixed, his mind awash with recollections of days when their paths had converged under happier circumstances. For a long moment, silence reigned between them, a silence heavy with all the words that had remained unspoken for years. Then, as if in response to an unspoken summons, Lena slowly turned her head, her eyes locking with his. The moment their gazes met, an electric current seemed to pass between them, bridging the chasm of time and regret that had kept them apart. In a voice barely above a whisper, she breathed, "Damien." The sound of his name, spoken by the woman who had once held his heart, sent a jolt of recognition through him that was both startling and deeply moving. He had imagined countless scenarios in which fate would grant him a second chance, a reunion under less fraught circumstances, perhaps during a serendipitous encounter in a distant city. Never had he fathomed that the moment of reckoning would come cloaked in the fragile form of a child and the soft, trembling voice of a once-forgotten love. As he stepped closer to the bed, his carefully guarded composure began to crumble, revealing the vulnerability beneath the armor of success. "What has happened?" he asked, his tone a blend of controlled concern and unspoken anguish. Lena's eyes shifted momentarily to the small figure standing silently at the side of the bed. The child's hand rested lightly on her mother's arm, a silent testament to the unbreakable bond between them. "Mom, I couldn't just stand by," the little girl whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I brought him here to help." The revelation that the child's name was Elise sent a shockwave through Damien. In that fleeting moment, the layers of his past, layers he had worked so hard to bury, came crashing down. Elise was not merely a stray child in need. She was the living embodiment of a connection he had once shared with Lena. A connection that had survived despite the passage of time and the distance of their choices. "Who is she?" he demanded, his voice low and tremulous with barely contained emotion. Lena's gaze faltered as she regarded Elise with a mixture of tenderness and sorrow. "She is my daughter," she confessed softly, her words laced with the weight of years spent in quiet despair. The admission reverberated in the room like a final, irrevocable truth. For a heartbeat, Damien felt as if the ground had shifted beneath him, the very foundation of his meticulously ordered life crumbling in the face of a reality he could no longer deny. His eyes searched Elise's delicate features, the gentle curve of her cheek, the unmistakable spark in her blue eyes, and in that reflection, he recognized an echo of himself. The realization that the child before him was not just a fragment of a past he had once cherished, but also a living testament to choices made long ago, filled him with a tumult of conflicting emotions. "She is my daughter, isn't she?" he whispered, the words barely audible as they trembled on his lips. Lena hesitated, her eyes glistening with unshed tears as she met his gaze. The silence that followed was laden with the sorrow of missed opportunities and the ache of unspoken regret. Finally, after what seemed an eternity, she offered the faintest nod of confirmation. "Yes, Damien," she murmured, her voice quavering. "She is yours." In that charged moment, the weight of their shared history crashed over him like a tidal wave. The realization that the daughter he had unknowingly lost, Elise, had been growing up in the shadow of a decision he had never been part of, filled him with a bitter cocktail of remorse, anger, and longing. "How long have you kept this from me?" he demanded, his voice rough with emotion, the words echoing in the stillness of the room like a long overdue reckoning. Lena's gaze dropped to her trembling hands and she exhaled shakily before speaking. "I was terrified," she admitted, her voice a fragile whisper laden with guilt and regret. "When I discovered I was expecting, you had already vanished into your world of ambition. I didn't want to disrupt the path you had so carefully chosen." Her words, meant to justify the silence that had stretched for years, only deepened the chasm between the man who had built an empire on control and the woman who had once dared to hope for love. Anger surged within Damien, a burning mix of indignation and heartbreak. He had always prided himself on his unwavering focus and his ability to compartmentalize, to keep personal entanglements at bay. Yet here, faced with the stark truth of a daughter he never knew existed, all his carefully constructed defenses began to crumble. "You should have told me," he growled, his voice a mixture of raw hurt and incredulity. "I had a right to know. You made a decision without me, a decision that changed everything." Lena's eyes glimmered with unspeakable sorrow as she met his gaze, each word weighed down by the years of unspoken love and regret. "I believed I was protecting you," she said softly, her voice barely audible. "I feared that if you knew, you would have abandoned everything to rush back into a past that I thought was better left forgotten." A heavy silence settled between them as the magnitude of the revelation sank in. The hospital room, once a sterile space of routine and clinical detachment, now felt charged with the remnants of a lifelong past. Damien's heart pounded in his chest as he struggled to reconcile the man he had become with the father he never knew he was. Every instinct screamed for him to reclaim the years lost, to embrace the tender, aching reality of family. Yet his mind reeled under the weight of so many unanswered questions. In that solemn moment, the world outside seemed to vanish, leaving only the three of them suspended in a fragile, uncertain peace. The echo of old promises, the ghost of what might have been, lingered in every silent pause and every tear that threatened to fall. Damien's thoughts raced as he tried to piece together the fragments of a past that had once been so vivid and now seemed so irretrievably distant. He took a tentative step forward, the distance between him and Lena shrinking as he searched for any sign of the man he once was, a man capable of love, of protection, and of redemption. "Tell me everything," he implored, his voice steadier now but still laced with an urgency that spoke of wounds not yet healed. "I need to understand how we got here, how I missed all these years, how I lost the chance to be there for her." Lena's eyes filled with a sorrow that was both tender and excruciating as she began to speak, each word a confession of love, fear, and regret. The hospital room, with its soft beeping of monitors and gentle hum of activity beyond its walls, became the unlikely stage for a reunion of hearts that had been separated by time and circumstance. With every syllable, the distance between past and present blurred, until all that remained was the raw, unvarnished truth of what had been sacrificed in the name of ambition and pride. As the words spilled forth, of nights spent in quiet loneliness, of choices made in haste, and of the enduring hope that had somehow survived despite it all, Damien listened intently, each revelation a bittersweet reminder of the life he might have had. The realization that the daughter he had never known was out there, growing up in a world that he had once thought belonged solely to his ambitions, stirred within him an overwhelming desire to right the wrongs of the past. In that pivotal moment, as the weight of the truth pressed down upon him, Damien felt the stirring of a long-dormant resolve, a resolve to mend the broken pieces of his history, to embrace the complexities of love and loss, and to forge a future where success was measured not solely by achievements, but by the enduring bonds of family and compassion. The realization was as sudden as it was profound. The life he had built, characterized by ruthless ambition and meticulous control, now teetered on the brink of transformation. Here, in the quiet intimacy of a hospital room, far removed from the cold corridors of power, lay the promise of redemption, a chance to reclaim a part of himself that he had thought lost forever. The echoes of the past whispered possibilities of forgiveness and reconciliation, urging him to take the first tentative steps toward a future in which he would no longer stand alone. In that moment, Damien Rivers understood that the empire he had built might have been forged in the crucible of ambition, but its true measure lay in the relationships he had once neglected. As he gazed into the eyes of Lena and the innocent eyes of little Elise, he felt a stirring of hope, a possibility that, even after years of isolation and calculated detachment, it was not too late to rebuild, to reconnect, and to heal the wounds of a past that had long been buried. Damien's mind whirled as the weight of his past and the unexpected future converged into one excruciating moment. Every step he had taken in his relentless pursuit of success now seemed tainted by a single, painful question. Had he ever truly been the father Elise so desperately needed? The thought churned within him, twisting his stomach in knots, and his eyes involuntarily sought out the little girl who now occupied a place in the deepest recesses of his soul. There, cradled in the fragile cocoon of a hospital room, renamed St. Marcellus Memorial, a place that exuded both sterile efficiency and an unintentional warmth, Elise sat quietly, her small hands clutching the edge of her mother's faded blue blanket. The fabric, worn from years of gentle handling, seemed to hold the secret of a lost childhood and unspoken promises. That charged silence, the child's eyes, so strikingly similar to a long-forgotten reflection of Damien's own, told him more than words ever could. Despite her tender age, it was clear that Elise possessed an acute awareness of the magnitude of what was unfolding around her. Yet, the innocence of youth shielded her from the full brunt of the revelation. With a trembling voice softened by regret, Lena, whose once vibrant spirit now flickered under the weight of illness and memories, whispered, "I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you." Her admission was laden with sorrow and the quiet resignation of someone who had borne burdens alone for too long. I didn't know how else to do it," she added, the unsaid words hanging in the air between them like a fragile bridge spanning years of separation. Damien exhaled slowly, striving to push past the storm of conflicting emotions raging within him. He could see that Lena's confession was only a fraction of a deeper truth, one that had been hidden away, sealed with fear and pride until now. "Does she know?" he asked quietly, his tone betraying both concern and the relentless need for clarity. Lena hesitated for a moment, her eyes glistening as she finally shook her head. "She knows about you. She knows your name, that you're successful, that I once cared about you. But she never knew the full truth," she murmured, her voice a fragile testament to the years of secrets and sacrifices. The admission stung Damien with a force he hadn't anticipated. Numbly, he turned his attention back to Elise, whose curious gaze was fixed on him, as if trying to decipher the man who had once been nothing more than a distant figure in a life he had carefully compartmentalized. His heart pounded as he knelt down to her level, suddenly feeling like a stranger in the very story of his own existence. "Elise," he began gently, "do you understand what we're talking about?" The question hung between them like a tentative invitation to rebuild a connection that had been fractured by time and neglect. For a long, measured moment, the little girl hesitated. She glanced between her mother and him, as if seeking confirmation from both, before testing the weight of the words on her tongue. Then, in a voice as soft as a whispered promise, she replied, "You're my dad." The simplicity of those words cut through the room, rendering them both vulnerable and irrevocably bound by the truth they now shared. Damien's breath caught as if the very air had shifted around him. Hearing the words aloud made them impossibly real. With a lump in his throat that refused to dissipate, he forced himself to maintain eye contact with her, his voice trembling as he affirmed, "Yes, I am." The sincerity in his tone was met with a cautious pause from Elise. Her face, a portrait of careful contemplation, registered a quiet inquiry before she asked, almost in a whisper, "Are you staying?" It was a question so unassuming yet laden with a gravity that nearly shattered him. For years, Damien had meticulously crafted promises to business partners, investors, and shareholders, a network of obligations woven into the fabric of his empire. But never had he made a promise so personal, so fraught with the tender vulnerability of a father's love. In that moment, the magnitude of the promise he was about to make was palpable. It was not measured in monetary value or corporate gains, but in the currency of life itself. Without a moment's hesitation, he responded with quiet firmness, "Yes, I'm staying." Elise's eyes, flickering with a mix of uncertainty and a nascent hope, slowly brightened as she nodded. Lena, who had watched the tender exchange between father and daughter with a mask of stoic resignation, finally broke the silence. "What happens now?" she inquired, her tone laced with equal parts apprehension and the weary acceptance of someone who had endured a lifetime of solitude and sacrifice. Damien knew that he did not have all the answers. Life's answers were rarely so clear, but one thing was indisputable: he was not going to walk away. "We figure it out together," he declared, his voice resolute as if anchoring himself to a newfound purpose. The countless years he had spent perfecting the art of control and precision in the ruthless world of business suddenly seemed trivial in the face of this raw, emotional reconnection. In that cramped yet significant hospital room, every second pulsed with the promise of redemption. Every breath echoed with the potential to rewrite a destiny that had long been dictated by ambition alone. The revelation of Elise's existence had shattered the meticulously built edifice of Damien's life. An entire decade had slipped away while he was engrossed in his relentless pursuit of power, leaving him bereft of the one role he now longed to embrace, the role of a father. The enormity of that lost time was overwhelming, yet there was no space for self-reproach at that moment. There were far more urgent matters at hand. Lena's fragile state of health demanded immediate attention, and Elise, though wise beyond her years, was visibly exhausted from carrying the emotional weight of revelations too heavy for someone so young. The fragile equilibrium of that room was a silent testament to lives in transition, caught between past regrets and uncertain futures. Standing with his hands buried in his pockets, Damien's mind raced like 1,000 gears working in tandem. The meticulous, business-savvy part of him had already shifted into high gear, assessing, calculating, and planning the next necessary steps with clinical precision. Lena's deteriorating condition left little room for delay. The doctors had stressed the urgency of surgery, and he was determined not to let bureaucracy or financial constraints stand in the way of her care. "What's the next step?" he inquired, his voice even but firm, cutting through the emotional fog that had settled over the room. Lena blinked as if startled by the sudden question. "What do you mean?" she asked hesitantly. "For your treatment," Damien clarified, his tone softening just a fraction as he sought to bridge the gap between clinical necessity and personal care. "I assume there's a plan," he continued, prompting Lena to drop her gaze to her trembling hands. With a heavy sigh, she explained that the doctors intended to schedule her surgery within a few weeks. However, a critical obstacle loomed large. The lack of sufficient insurance coverage and the rapid depletion of her savings on treatments meant that her financial situation was precarious at best. The mere thought of her struggling alone, burdened by financial worries on top of her failing health, sent a surge of protective fury through him. "That's not a concern anymore," Damien declared resolutely, pulling his sleek smartphone from the depths of his tailored jacket. "You're getting the best care available. I'll handle the costs." His words, spoken with the decisive authority of a man accustomed to controlling every facet of his life, carried the promise of unwavering support, even if it meant bending the rigid rules he had long imposed upon himself. Lena's face immediately contorted with a flash of resistance and wounded pride. "Damien, no," she protested, her voice a mix of defiance and vulnerability. "I didn't tell you about Elise to ask for money." Her words hung in the air, charged with the delicate balance of love, hurt, and a lifetime of silent endurance. But Damien's gaze hardened as he stepped closer, his tone dropping to a gentle yet firm murmur. "I don't care why you told me. The fact is, I know now, and I'm not going to stand by while you risk your life because you're too proud to accept help." His words, though softened by concern, carried the unmistakable weight of someone who could no longer abide by past mistakes. Lena's eyes flitted toward Elise, who remained serene despite the tension that swirled like an unseen storm in the room. In that brief, charged moment, Damien lowered his voice even further, as if confiding a secret in a sacred space. "I know you've always managed on your own," he said, his voice tender yet unwavering. "But you don't have to anymore. Whether you like it or not, I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere." For a long heartbeat, Lena's face was a canvas of conflicting emotions. It appeared as though she might have launched into a protest, insisting on her self-reliance with all the force of her lifelong independence. Yet, gradually, the tension in her shoulders eased, her eyes softening as she murmured, "Fine, but only if you let me pay you back when I can." Damien exhaled slowly, acknowledging that this fragile compromise was perhaps the best they could hope for at this juncture. "Deal," he agreed quietly. Lena's gaze drifted down to Elise once more as she tenderly reached out to brush a stray lock of hair from the little girl's face. "She's been so strong through all of this," she whispered, her voice trembling with both admiration and sorrow. Too strong for her age. In that moment, Damien's eyes lingered on Elise, the realization of his past negligence mingling with a newfound determination to never let her bear such burdens alone again. He admitted to himself in a silent vow that the future would be different, that the mistakes of the past would no longer dictate the life of the daughter he had unknowingly lost. As the minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity, Lena leaned back against the pillow, her expression weary yet resolute. "She'll need time, Damien," she cautioned softly. "You can't just step in and expect everything to fall into place overnight." Her words, though gentle, carried the wisdom of a woman who had weathered storms alone for far too long. "I know," he replied, his voice laden with regret and determination. "But I can't ignore the fact that I've already missed too much time. I need to figure out how to make up for it." A faint smile tugged at Lena's lips, a gesture of both resignation and a cautious hope that perhaps change was indeed possible. "You're already doing more than I ever expected," she murmured, her tone a blend of gratitude and the lingering ache of past disappointments. Damien struggled to find the right words in response. Part of him was still reeling from the shock of being excluded from Elise's life for so long, while another part recognized that his earlier self had been consumed by ambition. Had he been ready for fatherhood if Lena had told him? The question hung in the air unanswered as he resolved that no matter what, he would not allow another moment to slip away. Determined to reclaim the lost years and redefine success in a way that embraced both power and compassion, Damien pulled out his phone and began making a series of urgent calls. In a blur of activity that stretched into the early hours of the morning, he secured the services of the finest doctors in the region and ensured that every aspect of Lena's care was meticulously arranged. By daybreak, St. Marcellus Memorial was abuzz with preparations for the long-awaited surgery. Every expense, every logistical hurdle was swiftly overcome by the unwavering resolve of a man who had built an empire, and now was building a future founded on love and redemption. In the ensuing days, the hospital transformed into a hub of orchestrated activity. Damien's relentless determination ensured that every possible precaution was taken, every detail scrutinized, as the scheduled operation approached. Despite her initial reluctance, Lena had gradually allowed him to assume control over the unfolding plans. The transformation was not immediate. Every new arrangement brought with it a silent struggle as Lena reconciled her need for independence with the stark reality of her vulnerability. Yet, amid the bustling corridors and quiet moments in the waiting room, a fragile hope began to blossom. Evening, after long days filled with strategic meetings and endless phone calls, Damien found solace in the quiet intimacy of Lena's room. The early visits had been awkward. Elise, though eager to bridge the gap between a life she had known and a future filled with uncertainty, treated him with cautious politeness. There was an unspoken question in her eyes, a silent inquiry into whether he would remain, whether the man who had once been an enigma in her life would now become a constant presence. His heart ached with the realization that the years of absence had created a chasm not easily bridged, yet he was resolved to narrow that distance one careful moment at a time. One evening, as the golden hues of dusk filtered through the hospital window, Damien arrived later than usual. Meetings had overrun, and by the time he reached the quiet room, Lena had already surrendered to sleep, leaving Elise curled up in the chair beside her bed. A well-worn book rested on her lap, a mystery novel that had evidently become a cherished companion during the long, contemplative hours. As he entered, Elise lifted her eyes and stated matter-of-factly, "You're late today." Her tone was neither accusatory nor disappointed. It was merely an observation, a reminder that the dynamics between them were evolving with each passing day. Damien offered a solemn nod, stepping further into the room with a quiet apology. "I had some work to finish," he explained softly. Yet, as he drew nearer, he recalled the promise he had made, the promise that he would be there, steadfast and unwavering. Elise, with the tender precision of a child who understood more than she let on, nodded in acknowledgement. "Yeah, you did," she affirmed, her voice laced with both youthful simplicity and a hint of guarded optimism. Curiosity sparked in Damien's eyes as he glanced at the book cradled in her delicate hands. "What are you reading?" he asked, genuinely intrigued by the world that had captured her attention. For a brief moment, she hesitated before holding up the cover so he could see. "It's a mystery book. Mom got it for me a while ago," she explained, her tone casual yet reflective of the small treasures that had come to define her quiet world. Drawing a chair closer, Damien sat down beside her, his presence both reassuring and tentative. "Do you like mysteries?" he inquired, the question carrying a double meaning, a subtle hint at the unpredictability of life itself. Elise shrugged, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Sometimes. I like trying to figure out what happens before the book tells you," she admitted, her eyes alight with a spark of determination that belied her years. A gentle smirk played on Damien's face. "That's a good skill to have," he mused, being able to see the ending before it happens. Her thoughtful gaze met his, and in that exchange, a quiet understanding passed between them. A silent recognition that life, with all its twists and turns, was far more unpredictable than any carefully crafted plan. "Is that how you got rich?" Elise asked unexpectedly, her voice soft yet inquisitive. The question, posed with the curiosity of someone who had pieced together fragments of overheard conversations, was both endearing and disarming. Damien paused, the admission weighing on him before he answered honestly. "Part of it. I learned how to predict things, how to stay ahead." Yet, with a reflective sigh, he added, "But sometimes the best things in life aren't the ones you plan for." A moment of silence ensued as Elise flipped a page, her eyes tracing the worn edges of the book's cover, a silent metaphor for the fragility and resilience of the past. "You didn't plan for me," she finally murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. The words struck him with an unexpected force, a poignant reminder of the years lost and the opportunities missed. Leaning forward slightly, Damien replied with genuine sorrow, "No, I didn't. But that doesn't mean I don't want to be here now." Elise's gaze dropped to her book as she pondered his words, her fingers lingering on the faded title. "I guess I just don't know what this means yet," she admitted, her voice carrying the uncertainty of a future unwritten. With a reassuring nod, Damien met her eyes and said, "That's okay, we'll figure it out together." After a long moment of shared silence, Elise shifted in her chair, sitting up a little straighter as if gathering her thoughts. "Do you want me to tell you what the book is about?" she asked, the invitation lightening the heaviness that had pervaded the room. The simple request eased something inside him, a small spark of hope that perhaps understanding could be rebuilt, word by word, moment by moment. "I'd like that," he responded. Opening the book again, Elise began recounting the plot of a detective novel, one that started simply but quickly spiraled into complexities that mirrored the unpredictable nature of life itself. As she described the twists and turns of the case, Damien listened intently, his heart softening with each word. The way her face lit up as she spoke was a small, significant step forward, a step toward mending a bond that had been fractured by years of absence and unspoken regret. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Damien allowed himself to believe that he still had a chance to be the father Elise deserved, a chance to rewrite the narrative of his life, one where success was no longer measured solely by power and profit, but by the depth of human connection and the promise of unconditional love. Then came the morning of Lena's surgery, a day that arrived sooner than Damien had anticipated, laden with the quiet urgency of final preparations. Over the past week, he had devoted every waking moment to ensuring that every precaution was taken. The best surgeons were on her case, every logistical detail meticulously arranged, and a safety net put in place for Elise, regardless of what the future might hold. Yet, amid all the careful planning and relentless control he had always wielded over his world, there remained one immutable truth, the uncertainty that now clung to the edges of their lives, a constant reminder of the fragility of hope. Before the break of dawn, Damien stepped into the cool, pre-dawn air as he made his way to St. Marcellus Memorial, a name he now used for the once familiar hospital to mark a new beginning. The corridors, dimly lit by the gentle glow of early morning, held a sense of quiet anticipation. He arrived at Lena's room just as the nursing staff was busy preparing her for the impending procedure. The room, although stark and clinical, carried a subdued warmth that seemed to hint at the life and memories that had once filled it. Lena, lying there on the bed, with a mix of vulnerability and courage, turned her tired eyes toward him. There was an unmistakable softness in her expression, a softness that had been slowly emerging over the past week, as she began to accept his steadfast presence, no longer regarding it as a temporary intrusion into her solitary battle. "You're here early," she murmured, her voice hoarse yet filled with a gentle gratitude that resonated in the quiet room. Damien moved closer, his footsteps measured and deliberate. "I wasn't going to let you face this alone," he replied softly, his tone firm yet compassionate. As he drew near, he glanced toward the corner where Elise lay fast asleep on a plush chair. "I made sure Elise was comfortable," he added, his words a quiet reassurance that bridged the gap between businesslike resolve and heartfelt care. Lena's gaze softened further, a fragile smile briefly lighting her features as she recalled the previous night. "She told me you stayed late," she whispered, the words carrying both surprise and a tender warmth. "She likes having you around." For a moment, Damien's heart stuttered. He had spent so many years avoiding any entanglements that the mere thought of being embraced in such a personal role was foreign to him. Yet the news of Elise's quiet acceptance stirred something deep within him, a realization that perhaps he was capable of more than the relentless pursuit of success. "She's a good kid," he finally admitted, his voice low and thoughtful. "Strong, just like you." Lena's eyes glistened with unspoken memories and hard-won wisdom. "She has to be," she said, her tone tinged with both admiration and sorrow. The words carried the heavy burden of a life where innocence was stolen too soon, where a child was forced to mature under the weight of loss and unspoken sacrifice. Sitting in the chair beside the bed, Damien's fingers interlaced tightly as he gazed at Lena with an intensity that conveyed more than words ever could. "No more doing this alone," he declared, his voice resonating with newfound resolve. "That ends today." A long, measured pause followed his declaration, a pause in which both understood the uncharted territory that lay ahead. Lena exhaled slowly, her eyes reflecting a mixture of fear and hope as she spoke. "I still don't know what this looks like, Damien. Us." He offered her a reassuring smile that was both tentative and sincere. "You, me, and Elise. We don't have to have all the answers right now," he said, his words deliberately gentle. "But I do know one thing. I'm not walking away." Lena studied him for several heartbeats before finally nodding, a silent agreement passing between them. "Okay," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Their fragile moment of unity was soon interrupted by the arrival of a nurse. "Ms. Brooks, it's time to take you down to pre-op," the nurse announced in a professional yet caring tone. Lena glanced at Damien one last time, her eyes a blend of apprehension and trust, before shifting to sit up. In that brief instant, as she wobbled slightly, Damien instinctively reached out and steadied her. The touch was fleeting, yet it carried the weight of a shared history and the promise of a future they were determined to reclaim. "Take care of her while I'm in there," Lena pleaded softly, her eyes locking with his. "Please." "You don't even have to ask," Damien replied firmly, his voice imbued with the assurance of a man who had finally learned the true meaning of responsibility. With a small nod from Lena, the nurses gently wheeled her out of the room, leaving Damien standing in a suddenly cavernous space where her presence had just been. For a few long moments he remained motionless, his eyes fixed on the empty space, as if trying to imprint the memory of her in his mind before it faded away. Taking a deep, steadying breath, he turned and made his way to the waiting area. There, in a quiet corner of the hospital, Elise sat alone in one of the hard plastic chairs, her small frame curled up, with her arms wrapped around her knees in a posture of vulnerability and silent resilience. When Damien approached, her blue eyes, so similar to his own, lifted to meet his, filled with worry that no child should have to bear. "Is she gone?" Elise asked, her voice trembling slightly with uncertainty. "They just took her," and Damien replied, lowering himself into the seat beside her. His voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of raw emotion that belied his steady tone. Elise's gaze dropped to the floor as she fiddled nervously with the hem of her sweatshirt. "I'll be okay, but what if something goes wrong?" she murmured, her words heavy with the fear of the unknown. Comforting her was a task Damien had never been accustomed to. He had always measured success in figures and strategic wins, not in soothing the raw, unfiltered pain of a frightened child. Yet, as he looked into her worried eyes, he realized that some things could not be fixed with money or power. Some things required a presence, a promise, and an embrace that said, "I'm here for you." Gently he reached out and rested a steady hand on her shoulder. "She's in good hands," he reassured her quietly. "The best doctors are with her, and no matter what happens, we'll get through this together." "Together," Elise repeated, her voice gaining strength as she searched his face for certainty. After a long moment, she exhaled slowly and nodded in agreement. For what seemed like an eternity, they sat in the quiet waiting room, the harsh fluorescent lights casting a soft glow over their shared space. Damien found himself in a rare situation where he was not in control, where the careful calculations and decisions of his corporate life had no sway over the ticking clock and the fragile hope that filled the room. The minutes dragged by, each one feeling longer than the last, as he wrestled with the reality that the fate of someone he had once held dear was now entirely out of his hands. Elise remained silent, her eyes occasionally shifting with a mix of anticipation and sorrow. Every so often she would clench her knees tighter or fidget with the sleeves of her sweatshirt, small actions that betrayed the depth of the fear she was trying to conceal. When a nurse strolled by, her eyes bright with professional detachment, Elise's head jerked up momentarily only for disappointment to wash over her when the nurse continued on without acknowledgement. Damien leaned toward her, his voice soft but steady. "I know it's hard," he murmured. "I don't have all the answers right now. But I do know that she's strong, and she's got people fighting for her." Elise's eyes met his, a spark of determination flickering in them despite the weight of her uncertainty. "Did you ever think about her after you left?" she asked suddenly, her voice tentative yet laden with the quiet sadness of a child who had never quite been forgotten. The question caught Damien off guard. He shifted slightly in his seat, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "I did," he admitted quietly. "More than I ever let myself say out loud. There were moments, countless moments, when I thought about reaching out. But I convinced myself that you'd moved on, that you didn't need me anymore." Elise frowned, her eyes softening with both understanding and a tinge of sorrow. "You never stopped needing me," she said gently, her words carrying the weight of a lifetime of unmet expectations. "I just didn't want to get in your way." The truth of her words sank deep into Damien's heart, heavier than any calculation he had ever made. Lena's fierce independence, her determination to shoulder every burden alone, had cost them both dearly. "I should have been there," he confessed after a long, pensive silence. Elise sighed softly, then reached out as if to comfort him. "You're here now," she said simply, as though that singular truth could mend years of absence. Damien looked at her, recognizing in her eyes a depth beyond her tender age, a resilience that spoke of hardships endured and a spirit that refused to be broken. "You remind me so much of her," he observed quietly, and for the first time in a long while, a small, genuine smile tugged at the corner of Elise's lip. Before they could share another word, the door to the surgical wing opened and a doctor emerged, his expression calm and reassuring. Elise jumped to her feet, and Damien followed, his heart pounding with an unfamiliar mix of anxiety and hope. The doctor approached them with a nod of reassurance. "The surgery was successful," he announced. "Lena is stable and is being moved to recovery now." Relief flooded the room as the doctor continued. "She'll be groggy for a while, but everything went as planned." Elise let out a shaky breath, her tense shoulders relaxing imperceptibly. "Can we see her?" she asked eagerly, her voice trembling with cautious optimism. The doctor paused. "She needs some time to wake up fully, but one of you can go in first, just for a few minutes." Without hesitation, Elise turned to Damien, her expression resolute. "You go," she insisted, her tone firm despite her tender age. Damien blinked in surprise. "Are you sure?" he asked softly. She nodded with quiet determination. "Yeah. I'll go in after," she replied. For a moment, he was struck by her selflessness, the way she had already learned to put others before herself. After a brief nod of acceptance, Damien followed the doctor down the corridor. The rhythmic beeping of monitors greeted him as he entered the recovery room. There, lying on the bed with fragile determination, was Lena. She looked more delicate than ever, pale and fragile, but she was breathing steadily. Damien hesitated for just a moment before taking a seat in the chair beside her. His eyes filled with a mix of relief and tender remorse as he leaned in, speaking in a hushed tone. "You scared the hell out of me," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "But you made it through." Lena's eyelids fluttered slightly before opening just enough to meet his gaze. "Damien?" she managed, her voice barely above a whisper, laden with both pain and gratitude. "I'm here," he assured her, leaning even closer. "Everything went well. The doctor said you'll be okay." A faint smile appeared on her lips as she reached out, her hand twitching lightly against the crisp white sheets. "You stayed," she murmured, her tone a delicate mix of hope and vulnerability. He tightened his grip on her fragile hand, the contact affirming his promise. "Of course I did," he replied, his voice resolute yet gentle. In that quiet moment, as the steady beeps of the monitors filled the room, Damien felt a profound shift within himself, a stirring that went beyond business acumen or calculated success. It was a raw, genuine feeling that whispered of home and belonging. Lena's recovery, though gradual, brought a sense of relief. The doctors were optimistic, and within days she began to sit up, her conversations growing longer and her strength visibly returning. During this period of recovery, Damien became a constant presence in the hospital. He ensured that Lena received the finest care available, private nurses, round-the-clock attention, and every comfort he could provide. Slowly, even Elise, who had always been wary of this unexpected addition to her life, began to warm up to him. Their early interactions were tentative, punctuated by cautious glances and brief exchanges, as if she was still testing the waters of trust. One bright afternoon, Damien found himself standing in the doorway of Lena's room, only to see Elise sitting beside her bed, softly reading aloud from a well-worn book. Lena, half awake and smiling faintly, acknowledged his presence with a look that combined tiredness with genuine affection. "You're just in time for the best part," she murmured. Elise's eyes flickered with a blend of shyness and anticipation as she extended the book toward him. "Do you want to read the next page?" she asked, her voice a gentle invitation. Though taken aback by the unexpected request, Damien accepted the book without hesitation. He moved to the chair beside Lena and settled in, carefully finding the spot where Elise had paused. As he began reading aloud, his voice, once so firm and unyielding, softened into a cadence that filled the room with warmth and reassurance. Both Lena and Elise listened intently, their shared presence transforming the cold, sterile room into a haven of tentative hope. Later that evening, after Lena had drifted into a quiet sleep, Damien stepped outside with Elise, who had insisted on getting some fresh air. They found a secluded bench near the entrance of St. Marcellus Memorial, where the cool evening breeze wrapped around them like a comforting embrace. "You know," Elise began softly, kicking a small pebble along the edge of the bench, "I used to make up stories about you." Damien turned to her, intrigued by the unexpected remark. "What kind of stories?" he asked, a gentle smile playing on his lips. "Sometimes I imagined you as a secret agent," she replied with a slight shrug. "Other times you were a famous explorer. Once I even thought you were a prince on a mission to save a kingdom." He chuckled quietly at her imaginative musings. "I think the explorer version suits me best," he admitted, his tone light yet reflective. Elise's eyes softened, and for a moment the weight of the past seemed to lift. "I used to wonder why you weren't here," she confessed quietly, her voice trembling with a blend of longing and forgiveness. The admission struck Damien deeply. It was a stark reminder of the years lost, of the time he had spent chasing ambition at the expense of personal connection. "I'm sorry," he murmured, his voice heavy with regret. "I should have been here for you." Elise sighed, but there was no anger in her tone, only a quiet sadness laced with acceptance. "But you're here now," she said simply, as if that singular fact could mend the years of absence. In that moment, as they sat together under the soft glow of the hospital's exterior lights, Damien felt something he had long thought unreachable, a genuine sense of belonging, a realization that the most important victories in life were not those measured in profits or accolades, but those found in the bonds of family and the strength of the human spirit. Remembering that this new beginning was fraught with uncertainty, yet filled with promise, Damien resolved to embrace every moment with open-hearted determination. In the gentle silence of the night, he vowed to rebuild what had been lost, to nurture the fragile hope that now connected him to both Lena and Elise, and to cherish the unplanned, unpredictable moments that made life worth living. Damien's journey had led him through a labyrinth of unexpected emotions and life-altering revelations, a path that now found its final, resonant cadence in the quiet, reflective moments shared with his newfound family. As he sat beside Elise in the gentle glow of the early evening, the words they exchanged wove a tapestry of understanding and fragile hope. "But now, I think I get it," Elise said softly, her voice trembling, yet sincere, as she recalled what her mother had once confided. "Mom said you were building something important, and I guess I understand why she didn't tell you." Her simple admission carried the weight of years spent in silence and the bittersweet ache of missed opportunities. Damien exhaled slowly, leaning forward as if to bridge the chasm that had long separated their hearts. "I wish she had," he murmured, the regret and longing mingling in his tone. For a moment the air between them was charged with the unspoken promise of redemption and healing, a promise that neither time nor distance could erase. Elise nodded in quiet acknowledgement, her eyes glistening with a mixture of vulnerability and cautious optimism. "Me too," she replied, her words barely above a whisper, yet they resonated deeply with Damien, affirming that the future might hold more than the lonely victories of his past. After a pause that stretched between heartbeats, Damien's gaze hardened with resolve as he continued. "But I need you to know something." His voice, soft yet unwavering, carried the gravity of his newfound commitment. "I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." He searched Elise's eyes, as if seeking confirmation that his pledge was genuine. In that quiet moment, she studied him intently, as if to decipher the sincerity etched into every line of his face, before slowly nodding in agreement. "Okay," she said. That single word, simple and unadorned, became a sacred vow between them, a testament to the healing power of presence and shared promises. A week later, the echoes of hospital corridors gave way to the gentle hum of a new beginning. Lena was discharged from St. Marcellus Memorial, a name chosen to reflect the rebirth of hope and the promise of change. Though still weak and in need of rest, she was finally able to return to a world outside the clinical confines of the hospital. Damien had orchestrated every detail of her aftercare with meticulous care, arranging for her to recover in a serene, sunlit estate nestled in the rolling hills beyond the bustling city. The estate, renamed Edenwood Haven, was a sanctuary where the weight of the world could momentarily lift. A place where the scars of the past might begin to heal amid nature's gentle embrace. At first, Lena had protested the idea of leaving the hospital, her pride and ingrained sense of independence urging her to refuse any assistance. "I don't want to be a burden," she had insisted, her voice laced with the quiet defiance of a woman who had long prided herself on self-reliance. But Damien's words had been firm and tender, cutting through her resistance like a beam of light. "You're not a burden," he had told her, his tone imbued with both compassion and conviction. "You never were." And so, with some reluctance giving way to acceptance, she allowed him to help her settle onto the plush, welcoming couch in the spacious, sunlit living room of Edenwood Haven. As Lena sank into the soft cushions, a gentle sigh of contentment escaped her lips. The room was filled with a peaceful calm, a stark contrast to the storm of emotions that had once defined her days. Elise, now more a beacon of quiet strength than a symbol of pain, curled up beside her with an air of serene determination. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, both mother and daughter appeared to be at peace. Lena's gaze flickered toward Damien, her expression unreadable yet tender. "You really did all of this?" she asked, her voice a fragile blend of disbelief and gratitude. Damien nodded, his eyes reflecting the myriad emotions that had transformed him. "Of course," he replied simply, his voice steady despite the tumultuous journey that had led him to this moment. In response, Lena smiled softly, a small but genuine curve of her lips that conveyed her deep, unspoken thanks. "I don't know how to thank you," she murmured, her words carrying a wealth of meaning that transcended simple gratitude. "You don't have to," Damien said, his tone gentle yet resolute. "Just focus on getting better." There was a quiet assurance in his voice, a promise that he would remain by her side no matter what challenges lay ahead. Lena's eyes softened further as she studied him, and after a long, lingering moment, she reached out to rest her hand over his. The contact was delicate yet profound, a silent exchange laden with years of regret, unvoiced apologies, and the promise of a shared future. In that single gesture, they communicated everything that words had failed to capture. Elise, ever the silent observer of these tender moments, broke the quiet with a hesitant question. "So, what happens now?" she asked, her voice laced with the innocence of youth and the weight of all that had been lost and found. Damien looked first at her, then at Lena, and for the first time in his life he allowed himself to simply be present in the moment, without a perfectly planned answer, without the need to control every variable. "Now," he said slowly, "we figure it out. Together." The words, simple and unpretentious, carried with them a promise that was as enduring as it was heartfelt. Lena's eyes sparkled with a tentative hope, and Elise gave a small nod, a silent agreement that, despite the uncertainties, they would face the future as one united family. In that luminous moment, as Damien sat surrounded by the people he never knew he needed, he realized that for the first time, his thoughts were not preoccupied with the relentless chase of power or the calculated pursuit of wealth. Instead, his heart was fully present, rooted in the shared experience of love, loss, and the long, winding journey toward reconciliation. The ending of this chapter was not marked by a grand, sweeping resolution, but by the quiet, powerful truth that rebuilding relationships is not about instant fixes or miraculous transformations. It is about showing up every day with the unwavering commitment to nurture and cherish the bonds that make us human. Damien had started his life believing he had everything: power, wealth, and control. Yet through the unexpected revelation of a daughter he never knew existed, and the bittersweet return of Lena, he came to understand that true success is measured not in the towering structures of an empire, but in the fragile, intricate connections we forge with those we love. The beauty of their reunion lay in its raw authenticity. There were no dramatic declarations or contrived resolutions, only the steady, enduring promise that they would learn to heal together. Damien did not transform into the perfect father overnight, nor did Elise immediately trust him without hesitation. Instead, their journey was marked by small, significant steps. A hand held in silence, a look filled with unspoken words, and the simple act of sitting together in a quiet room as they awaited news. Lena's willingness to accept Damien's help was equally profound. For years, she had carried the weight of her independence like a shield, convinced that asking for assistance would render her vulnerable. Yet, in the twilight of her struggle, she recognized that true strength lies not in solitary endurance, but in the courage to lean on others. Her acceptance of Damien's care was not an admission of defeat, but a quiet, powerful act of trust. One that allowed her to see that he was sincere in his commitment, that he would not abandon her when the road grew rough. Elise, at the heart of their shared story, embodied both the pain of lost time and the luminous hope of second chances. Her cautious approach toward Damien was entirely natural. After all, how could she fully trust a man who had been a stranger for most of her life? And yet, as days turned into weeks, and small gestures of kindness and understanding accumulated, she began to open up. She shared her thoughts, her fears, and her dreams with him, slowly allowing him a place in her life. When she finally embraced him as her father, it was not because he had promised her the world, but because his actions had spoken louder than any words ever could. He had shown her that he was not just an absent figure from the past, but a man willing to fight for their future, to mend the broken pieces of their shared history. The final moments of their journey were not marked by the neat, tidy resolutions that one might expect from a conventional happy ending. Instead, they found beauty in the uncertainty of the future, an acknowledgement that while the road ahead was fraught with challenges and lingering wounds, they would face it together. Damien's heartfelt admission that he did not have all the answers was not a sign of weakness, but a testament to his growth. In that moment, he embraced the imperfection of life, understanding that what truly mattered was the willingness to journey forward side by side, despite the scars of the past. As the days passed and Lena's strength gradually returned, Damien continued to be a steadfast presence in their lives. He worked tirelessly to ensure that every need was met, every detail attended to, from arranging top-notch medical care to creating moments of joy and connection in the quiet corners of their new home at Edenwood Haven. Slowly but surely, the once fragmented family began to knit itself back together. Each shared laugh, every tender touch, a small but significant step toward healing. In the gentle cadence of ordinary days, reading stories aloud, sharing quiet meals, and simply sitting together in silence, the true power of their reunion shone through. It was not a story defined by dramatic twists or grand gestures, but by the quiet, persistent act of choosing each other every single day. Damien's heart, once hardened by the relentless pursuit of success, now beat with a newfound purpose. The unwavering desire to protect, to nurture, and to cherish the family that had finally found its way back to him. In the final analysis, Damien Rivers's transformation was profound. He had come to learn that the true measure of a man is not in the empires he builds, but in the love he cultivates. In embracing the chaos and unpredictability of life, he discovered that the most significant victories are not those etched in profit margins or corporate triumphs, but the moments when we dare to be vulnerable, to admit our shortcomings, and to rebuild what we once thought irretrievably lost. And so, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm, golden light over Edenwood Haven, Damien, Lena, and Elise sat together, three souls bound by a shared past and an even more hopeful future. In that timeless moment, they realized that family was not defined by perfection or by the neat tying of all loose ends, but by the steadfast promise to be there for one another, no matter what storms may come.